I'm not sure if it, I guess I was listed as the teacher. I don't know if any of you guys are familiar with me or my art. So I'm going to start with that just to give you guys a kind of a frame of who I am and what I do. And then I'll talk a little about how I got there. And then we'll talk about how you can get there too, essentially. So my name is Sam Flegal, and I do art for game companies. I've worked for AEG on Legend of the Five Rings. I've worked for Fantasy Flight on Warhammer Fantasy and Warhammer 40K. I've done, this is the book cover for the latest Fantasy Hero Complete from Hero Games. I've done the Monster Hunter International Employees Handbook cover. So I've done work on Fantasy Flight's 40K role-playing game. It was the Nurgle book that came out with them for, I believe it's Dark Crusade? Or Black Crusade. Black Crusade. Dark Heresy was the first set, but Black Crusade is the one where you can play the bad guys. I did some bad guys for them. So I've done a lot of different work, from spot interiors to covers to cards to board game art, and I've even designed miniatures for board game for a game called Defenders of the Realm. I designed the miniatures that you use in that game, and that's Eagle Griffin Games, I believe. So yes, I've done a lot of different stuff, but I've only actually been doing this about 4 or 5 years as far as professionally. Before I got into all this stuff, I had a whole different career in marketing and graphic design. I thought, like so many people do, that you had to go to school for art, and I went to school and got a degree in graphic design and came out and worked as a graphic designer for 7 years actually, before realizing that I hated it and actually wanted to work in games. I'd always liked playing games, and so that's kind of what I do now. Is I work in games, but at the time I was working in graphic design, and I thought there was like this very clear path that you had to follow. And I think, like a lot of people do as they get older, you start to realize that there's actually not really a path to life, and that you can sort of go a lot of different ways, and it's really just a series of choices that end up where you are. And I love games, and so I figured out, there are people working on games. I want to be one of those people. So try to figure out how you do that. And it took me some time, but I did. So let me walk you through my story real quick of how I got started in games, and kind of go from there. Like so many of you guys, I played Magic and D&D probably way too much in high school and college. So I was putting together work. I was still working as a graphic designer. I didn't just immediately quit my day job, but I wanted to be doing more art. I wasn't happy, going in, punching a clock, and doing that whole grind. So what I started doing was I started a club I called Creative Club, and I got together writers and artists that were friends, and I tried to draw stuff based on their stories, and they tried to write stories based on my drawings, and just kind of back and forth. But what this did is it set a schedule where once a week I had a group of people that were reliant on me producing art, and that kind of lit a little more fire under me to produce art. I will say that most of it was not very good. I didn't really know what I was doing, but the important thing was that I was drawing, that I was trying to paint. At the time I was working digitally. Then I did that for a couple of years, and then finally put together a book and started going to conventions and showing my portfolio around. And that's really the first big chunk of how you break in, is meeting the right people. And meeting the right people means coming to conventions and interacting. So in a way, if it is something you're actually interested in, breaking into game art for yourselves, you've sort of taken the first step already just by being here and at this convention and at this class. And so I will say kudos to you for getting out and doing it. Because a lot of people, they make art and they just leave it at home, or only show their friends, or are very insular. And no one will ever discover you except for maybe after you're dead, if someone's going through your house. And that's not really what I think any artist actually wants. More people want to be when you're putting together a book to take around conventions, you want to stick to 6 to 10 of your best pieces. One of the things that makes mistakes I made early on, which is classic mistake, now that I'm on the other side of the table, I do a lot of portfolio reviews, I say this all the time. Particularly, I think it comes from art school and feeling like you have to show everything that you do. So you'll have a life drawing and all this random stuff. And then people look at your portfolio and they're like, other than the fact that you can draw, I don't know what you do or how I would hire you. So like my first portfolio, I remember I had a picture of a fish that I'd done. It was just like a catfish. And I was like, what are the list of things I thought? I thought you needed like a sexy lady, either shooting guns or with a sword. And you need like a zombie and then a monster. And I just had all these like list of things I was trying to do, and that's totally the wrong way to go about it. So when you're putting together a portfolio for a convention like Origins or Gen Con or one of the bigger game conventions where you're going to meet some of these art directors, is you want to think about the product that they have, and does your art look like it belongs on their product? So if you want to work for, say, Magic the Gathering, then you should try and create art that looks like it fits Magic the Gathering. Someone's not going to look at your picture of a catfish and say, this guy would be perfect for the next blue card coming out. You know, it's like, yeah, that's not going to work. So that's one thing, a tip along the way. And so for me, I did not do it that way. I just had my jumbled portfolio, and I went to Dragon Con, was actually the first convention where I started showing a book around. And I just went up to every artist I could find that I liked their artwork and got them to review my book. And then I took their feedback to heart. And that's the other tip I'd give as we're going through this process is be prepared to get honest feedback. The chances are that you're probably not ready to work and that there's things you need to improve on. So when you speak to a professional, expect to get good feedback, but then take it to heart and go change those things. And I didn't realize at the time this was something I was good at, but it was something, because I've worked in marketing for so long. In a graphic design situation, everybody tacks up 10 logos on the wall, and then the art director comes in and just puts checks on the ones they want. So I was very used to being rejected and like, oh, this has to be changed. And so that aspect of it didn't really bother me. But since then, I've encountered artists that get very offended when they're showing their work, and there is that back and forth. And so if you have that inclination, that's something you really do need to work on. If you want to improve, you have to separate yourself from the art as you're showing it to the art directors and other artists. Another nice thing to do, which I tried to do at Dragon Con, was I tried to buy something from everybody who took the time to review my portfolio, even if it was just a $20 print or a $10 sketchbook or just something. Because also recognize, like, those guys are there to sell, and you are taking up their time to sell. And for me, I was approaching guys who were doing art, or ladies too, that did art that I liked, so it was very easy to find stuff I wanted to buy. I find that most artists are also art collectors as well. And so I got all this information, and for me, I started a blog, which I call an Artist Journey, and I actually listed all the feedback I got, like critiques about how I was bad and all that stuff, and I just posted it up. And then I started again, and you know, there's this constant editing process with your portfolio. John Shindahedi, who used to be the art director for Dungeons & Dragons, runs a blog called Art Order, and he has a really great quote on there about when you're evaluating your portfolio and you've got what you think are your 10 best pieces, and then what you want to do is figure out which one is the best one. And that's a hard place to like edit down like which is the best. And then your new goal is to make sure that your number one piece is very quickly the worst piece in your portfolio. And your goal is to do 9 pieces that are better than the best piece in your portfolio. And if you're constantly, you know, editing and evaluating, that's how you're gonna, you know, get your work together. Now, that said, when you're putting together your 6 to 10 best pieces, it may not just be that you always want to put the same 6 to 10 best pieces, because there's things that you might want to show an art director for Dungeons & Dragons that would be different than you'd show an art director that was working in book covers, or, you know, like if you're going to do a portfolio review with AEG for L5R, it might be nice to have at least one piece in there that was Asian themed, since they do, you know, their game is very Asian based. So you do want to curate some with an eye towards who's going to be looking, and it's not a bad thing to have multiple portfolios. It's one of the nice things too, if you have an iPhone or an iPad, you can actually set up multiple folders and show your, you know, portfolio, or you can print out books and have a different book for each company. But it's about, so what about the portfolio thing? What you're really doing for the art director is you're saying, I can solve the problem that you have. Every art director has a problem. They have a game, at least in game art, they have a game that they have to fill up with artwork, and they have to find people who meet their requirements. So if you can solve at least, you know, one piece of their puzzle, then you're helping them. And so it is a service-based thing. But if they look at your work and they don't see it fixing any of the problems that they have, or being a part of their service, then there's no need for them to use you. So I did conventions for a while, just taking my book around, and then eventually I got to the point where I want to show at conventions. The first convention I showed at was a really small convention in Nashville. That's where I'm from, is Nashville, Tennessee. And that'd be another thing I'd recommend is you're getting started and thinking about conventions. Find a con in your local area that you can just screw up and not lose a lot of money at, basically. Because like if you do a show like Gen Con, the booth fee is like $400. Dragon Con, they can be anywhere from $300 to $600 for an artist table. And I mean, so just investing $400 or $500 plus hotel plus everything, you could really not do well if you set up and you don't have a very good show, or you're not showing the right pieces, the right work. So the first thing would be set up in your local area and figure, kind of test the waters, figure out what you like, how you're going to talk about your work. But when you're ready, the bigger shows are where you're going to meet the art directors who work in games. Now with Gen Con, you can set up in the art show, but you could also just bring your portfolio and visit. Most of the big companies there have an art director who's at their booth, and they have set times that you can sign up for to get reviews. So that's a great place to meet people. I'm sure here this weekend at Origins, if you have a portfolio, several of the companies will have an art director here who could look at your work as you're going around. So for me, where the moment changed was it was the third Gen Con I'd done. So I've been showing at Gen Con for 3 years and not really working in games. And I had done a painting for a friend of mine who was doing an open game license, Dungeons and Dragons 3rd edition book. And I had done a cover for him, and I really knocked this thing out. It was just, things clicked. At this point I've been spending 3 years trying to get better and better and better, and it was just this big battle scene with a bugbear and 9 kobold zombies and a lich and the heroes battling, and it really connected. And that Gen Con was a banner year because I sold that painting, but in addition to selling the original painting, the art director for Fantasy Flight walked by, and they're like, "Wait, that's you? Your stuff's really gotten better. Do you know anything about Warhammer?" And I was like, "Do I?" Let me tell you what, I have a 6,000 point army. The bugbear to her looked like that'd be a great orc. You ever interested in doing any orc stuff? Like, yeah, for sure. So then I got a card for Fantasy Flight, and when you get that first job, you may be surprised how little game art can pay, and that's where you have that choice of how bad do you really want to work in games? Why are you doing the art? And for me, it wasn't about how much I got paid. For me, it was I want to make the best piece I possibly can at this time. And it was 3 orcs charging up a hill, and there were dead elves and goblins all around the battlefield, and I just knocked this thing out. And so not only did it get used for the card it was intended for, but it also got chosen as the box art for the game, and it got me a lot of recognition. And from then I pretty much just steadily worked in games, and because then I had a body of work that looked like gaming stuff, and just moving from there. Eventually I got work with AEG, and then from setting up at Gen Con and just having, I work in oil paint. These are both oil paintings, or prints of oil paintings. But yeah, so I just have all these paintings behind me, and that's where things start to change. Is once you've done a few jobs and you have them behind you, then you're showing at a big show like Gen Con or Origins, and you have art directors coming to you, and then it's just a matter of taking the jobs you want to take or fit what you want to do, and by that point you may be a completely different artist anyway. But that's not so much what we're talking about today as much as we're the breaking in. So that was sort of how my journey went. Hopefully you guys picked up some tips in there. Are there any questions, anything you guys are like specifically wanting me to talk about today? I can keep going, but I thought I'd ask, since we've sort of been through the basic journey. Like, I guess let me ask, how many of you guys are artists interested in working in games that are here in the class right now? Put your hands up. So just, all right, so three or four. All right, so the rest of you guys, are you guys just interested in learning more about the process? Or like what just curious about like how
the ins and outs of how that works. I'm more of like, I want to be a game designer, so I kind of want to have an idea of like, what is it for the artist who is trying to sell pieces, and we'll get in that mindset, because as a role-playing game designer, I mean, the art is like the biggest expense you have, and especially indie games and so on. So
yeah, that's true.
Outside of having friends that are artists, you kind of have to know where they're coming from and what they're looking for to kind of have a better work.
Yeah. So to that, I can address a little bit. I've worked for a lot of different companies, and some artists would disagree with me, but I think what most artists want to do is to have pretty good freedom with the art. So you got to be specific enough to get what you want, but I mean, really, if you need a big orc painting, that's really all you need to say is, I need a big orc painting. It's like, you can kind of work from there. Some artists like more art direction, and so then you can be like, well, he's, maybe he's smashing a bar, or, like you can get really detailed with it. But for a lot of artists, the more they get to put in, I actually find it, it's like working on L5R is much easier than working on Warhammer, because the IP in Warhammer is so specific. Like, if you don't have the shoulder pads right on the Space Marines, like you gotta, and like, I did a piece for them of a Slanesh Emperor's Children, and I love chaos, so I was all about it, knew exactly what to do. But a lot of guys get into that stuff, and it's very constricting. So for me, like, why I want to work on games is because I'm trying to work on the games I love to play, because I love those worlds and getting to interact. Like, another piece I did recently for them was a Tyranid piece of a hive tyrant crushing an orc with his pincher tail. And for me, that was a blast. But I know some dudes would get that and be like, oh man, it's so specific. And I'm like, oh, but it's a hive tyrant. It's awesome. So a big part of it is feeling out, and also then looking at what the artist actually does. Like, looking at my work, if someone came to me and was like, hey, could you do a city scene or some cars? I'd be like, no. There's a reason none of that stuff is in my portfolio, because I hate that stuff. This one got really close with a freaking stained glass window in the background. That was specifically requested, but I made it work because I smashed out the guy's head in the stained glass window. I thought maybe if the dragon took it over, he'd be like, I don't like that guy's face. So you find ways to like it, but yes, that'd be the one thing.
Is that something like you can ask an artist? Like, what do you feel comfortable drawing?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's like people have answers to that, or if it's just they're like, oh, I don't know, what do you need?
It can go back and forth. I think the best way to approach that is to say, I'm with this company. These are the types of things we need. What is it you like to do? But usually you can just look and tell. I mean, you see their display or look through their book. That's another thing, is we're talking about breaking into art. You can really screw yourself if you, for me, I hate cars. If you have a portfolio, obviously I like to drive cars, I hate to draw cars. So if you have a portfolio, and I've done like a modern space orc leaping out of a car, and an art director really latches onto that, I could end up with 5 commissions of dudes leaping out of cars. And then you're like, oh man, like, I did not think this through. Another really common thing is people think they have to have sexy ladies in their portfolio, because you see so much of that. where it's like, pretty girls, pretty girls, pretty girls, but I don't really, I mean, don't get me wrong, I like pretty girls, but I don't really want to draw a lot of that stuff. I like doing badass, tough women, but not so much just like the standard, beautiful. But there are guys who love to do that, and they get tons of work because obviously that stuff sells. So, they do well. I got another friend, Chris Burdett. He just does monsters. He will actually not do a piece that involves like a normal human or an elf unless that person is being devoured by a monster or being crushed. Like, give him orc, he's fine, but it has to be a monster of some sort. And you'd think, like, well, isn't that really limiting? But instead, it's giving him a lot of really focused work, and he does his best work. In a way, you kind of need to start, as soon as you determine what it is you do want to do with your art, start figuring out what sort of brand statement you want to make with that stuff. An example like soda, like if you want a Coca-Cola, you don't go and buy a Sprite. If you just want a soda, a generic soda, you might be fine with a Sprite or an Orange Crush or a Pepsi or whatever. But sometimes, at least for me, like I need a Coca-Cola, and that's the only thing that I want. That's my brand, whatever. I know people like Mr. Pibb or Dr. Pepper, like whatever it is. But just like with all these other brands out in the world, people seek them out for a reason because they know what they're going to get, what it's going to taste like, what it's going to feel like, what the product is. And your art is actually the same in a lot of ways. I know several guys who just do like big landscape scenes or city scenes, or there's a guy at Gen Con who only does maps, and he does like amazing cartography work for fantasy settings. And when starting out, you wouldn't think like that's a dude's job is to just do maps, but that's what he does. I mean, there's even guys who just build like those hex maps that you use for D&D. Like you have to draw everything from the top down, and they've made good careers out of being the go-to guy for those things. So there's really no end to how specific you can actually get, with your art and those things. Yeah, question.
You mentioned showing stuff to art directors. How do you track art directors to help?
So the best way is to go to a big convention or a small one if there's an art director there, but to go to a convention where they have signups. Because that's a moment where the art director has agreed to review portfolios at a certain time, so you know that you're not bothering them because that's why they're there. And so that's the best. Or another great way is to go to a panel done by art directors. There was just an event a couple weeks ago called Spectrum Art Live, which was based, I don't know if you're familiar with the Spectrum Annual, but it's a big collection of sci-fi and fantasy art. And they have a big convention, and there were several art directors there, and they had an art director meet and greet and panels about what art directors are looking for. And so I really think conventions are the best way. You can mail off your work, but I've found there's nothing like that face-to-face interaction. Another great way is if you do get involved with the community, hang out in bars where the artists are hanging out. Make some friends with the artists. And eventually you'll meet the art director, and it's amazing. Like, I've gotten many a job because I shared a beer with the right person, and it's just like anything. It's all about networking and getting out there. But that can be a slow process. And networking is one of those words that sounds so daunting and nasty. But the cool thing about networking is all it actually is making friends with other people in your field. And everybody likes to make friends. Well, I shouldn't say everybody. Most people like to make friends. I do. And so it's cool because it's like you just end up meeting all these great people. And yes, it does factor into your career ultimately as well, but it's more about those relationships. Also, another place is there's a lot of art workshops you can go to, like the Illustration Master Class. I'm actually going to be doing an art workshop with a group. We're calling it One Fantastic Weekend. And these are great places to meet other students, but the cool thing about the other students is they're the people interested in bettering themselves. They've spent the money to be at the workshop. Similar with the conventions, it's not free to be here. None of us are here for free. At least if you are, tell me how you did it. But people have made an investment in themselves and in their career, and those are people you want to surround yourself with and start building and working forward. I'm not sure why I haven't mentioned it until this point, but I should say I'm a co-host of a podcast or a video cast called One Fantastic Week. Me and Pete Moorbacher. Pete used to do a lot of art for Magic the Gathering. Now he's sort of focusing on his own thing he calls Angelarium. And the two of us host a web show where we interview artists. We do 3 interviews a month, and then 1 episode that's just us talking about what's going on with us. And yeah.
I'm sorry, what was that again?
One Fantastic Week. So far we have 76 episodes and 7 what we call crit casts. So over 80 full episodes. The crit casts, we look at people's websites or their work, and we give critique and paint overs and stuff like that. We do that once a month. And then the other 3 weeks, we interview people. Next week, we're going to have Brahm on the show, actually. So super pumped about that. But we've had big names. We had Rebecca Gay, Donato Nicola, Dan DeSantos. I mean, we've had so many guests, so many great people. But just being a part of that community, we also do a Facebook group. Also, if you just search One Fantastic Week on Facebook, you'll find it. And people post there. So that's another way is to become involved in a community. But yeah, so art directors, though, they're actually not as hard to find as you think. I know initially it feels like they're not out there, but the real truth is that art directors actually want you to find them because they need new artists. They may look through at some of these bigger conventions 300 plus portfolios in order to find that one person who's right for the book cover. And you never know where you're going to fit in all that stuff. But yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about like social media? Because I guess what I'm trying to find is where, other than conventions, is there like common ground for like art designers, art directors are looking for art, and then the artists are trying to get their art to the art directors. And I know there's disconnect in between because like you said, a convention's like fair territory, but and sometimes I've seen like in Google Plus or Facebook, certain artists are being like, hey, check this out. It's a $250 commission. Check this, And I don't know if you know of any popular places, like when you meet new artists outside of conventions on an everyday sort of manner, where would you tell them to go that people will be looking for their work?
Instagram right now is the thing. Facebook killed itself with that new algorithm thing that they did back in January. You basically have to pay to get your stuff seen. And certainly, Instagram ultimately does upload to Facebook, but I know a lot of art directors now just get on and they search for the art hashtag or Insta artists, and they just start digging through. Yeah.
What's your opinion of DeviantArt?
I use DeviantArt. My opinion is that it's horribly designed, but it's worked really well. It took me a while to figure out, like, what the hell is this site? But I finally figured out that there's groups you can join and submit your art to. Once I started submitting to the groups, then I got picked up. I've had 2 daily deviations. And once you get a daily deviation, then your watch numbers go way up. And I think it helps. I'm not really sure. DeviantArt's one of those sites where I feel like, I don't know if it's working or if I'm just talking to 13-year-olds, I feel like Tumblr's really good too. I've heard a lot of artists. Reddit as well can be good. You have to be careful with Reddit because they really do make sure that you're not just promoting yourself, that you're actually becoming a part of the community. But the longer answer is post everywhere. You never know you never know how someone's going to find you or your art online. So yeah, join all of the social media sites, post your artwork everywhere. You can overpost, but as long as, a couple times a week you're posting up new pieces or stuff you've been working on and you're not like looking. Now, I have heard, this has happened to me a couple times, never really badly, but I've heard people can get a little pushy where you get a Facebook message and they're like, share my thing, share my thing. It's like asking other artists or art directors to share your thing, or even worse, another thing people do is they'll just tag a bunch of like professional artists and art directors in their posts. That is a surefire way to make sure that we hate you and don't look at your stuff. It's like man, I'm trying to curate my own page. I don't need like some random dude's drawing on his mother's fridge showing up, and so that's in bad taste. But with most things with social media, I find is if you're just polite and a cool dude, like that transfers to the internet pretty well. In fact, maybe even better, because it seems like there's a lot of not cool dudes on the internet. But yeah. Another thing I found worked really well with Instagram is using the hashtag WIP, but actually showing work in progress shots. I often get more likes on a work in progress shot than I do on a final image. And I think that's just because I have a lot of other artists as my friends, so they're more interested in how I do what I do because they do it too than we are actually in the final image. Yeah. Something else about the process, and this isn't so much about breaking in, but it was surprising for me, so I assume it may be for the people, but it takes a really long time to produce a painting. One of these paintings takes anywhere from 2 to 3 weeks for me to do, working 40 to 50 hours a week, which I figure that's like a normal job, 40, 50 hours a week. But you're spending that time painting. So the idea that you should be fast or you're going to crank this stuff out is a really terrible habit to get in. Spend the time, make quality work, create your work that you love and are passionate about. Particularly if you're still trying to break in, man, that's a great spot to be in because you only have to draw exactly what you want to in the way you want to do it. Like I got told this too when I was first starting, and I know you guys probably won't listen just like I didn't listen to it, but when you're in that moment, it's actually kind of a fun time to be creating images for your portfolio and trying to break in and being hopeful and just all that stuff. But yeah, take the time to create the art you actually really like. I mean, and don't be afraid to do some soul searching too. Like if you're really into skeletons or I don't know. For me, it was Norse mythology. I love Norse mythology, so I've gotten really into trying to depict different stuff, but not just like the surface level stuff. Like I even read dissertations or try to find papers published online by archaeologists who've done digs related to most recent discoveries, and a lot of that stuff inspires me to work. So that's the other thing I tell you is don't just focus on the gaming stuff. Don't be afraid to be passionate about something that's still in the fantasy genre. That stuff can ultimately get you a lot more work as well. Another thing you may find is, this is what I'm finding is, as you get into the game art, it's a good intro, but you sort of start moving beyond the game art, and there's so much artwork and art jobs out there that aren't as visible. Like with the Norse mythology stuff, I've actually done work for pagan circles, doing original paintings for them. And originally, my goal, I told you guys, was to draw cool orcs. So I never thought cool orcs would lead me to doing pagan religious art, but it has. And so you never know exactly where that art journey is going to take you as you start out. But I would have never gotten there had I not created paintings that I truly fell in love with and enjoyed making. So that's a big part of it too. Yeah, question?
How do you deal with intellectual property problems with the social media? Like people will just copy and paste pictures and share them and put them up as their own image and add words to them. And
Yeah, so I've done an image of, well, you guys can see it in a little bit. It's on this card. It's a picture of Odin. You can see it right behind my head, but I'll make sure everybody gets a card at the end. But I did a picture of Odin, and it's one of the most shared images of Odin out there, and I definitely do not always get tagged or referenced or whatever. And you can get really upset. You're like, no, people take my art, but instead, this is how I actually get like, Odin is the gray wanderer, so it only makes sense that he would want to wander the internet as well. But ultimately, I've seen friends of mine get really upset and contact people, and if I ever get, I often get messages now like, hey, someone's using your art, I just contact them, and if they're just using it as a meme or something, I just say, hey, if you would you throw a link to my website on that and let people know I'm the artist, and I just try to stay very positive and polite. I've not had anybody like make prints or actually sell any of my work that I'm aware of. But I know that stuff does happen too. But like I've seen some people will put like a big watermark across their stuff, but that just ruins your stuff. You think it's a beautiful painting, and then it's like stamp it with your name, and it's like something not right. You know, if you want to, you can have something small in the corner. I may start doing that. I probably should be better about putting my website on just in a really unobtrusive way. So as it circulates the internet, someone who finds it might get linked back up to your site. But you can, I don't know, I just choose not to spend too much time worrying about all that. I've also found it seems that, I don't want to say younger, but artists at the beginning of their journey are still trying to break in, seem a lot more concerned with having their art stolen than guys who've been in the field for a really long time. Because the other side of it is like, I make so much art at this point that if you could, I don't know, you could spend so much time policing it. And for me, it also really bummed me out. And that's the other thing about art that's harder is with art, you know, you're when you get bummed out, it can reflect in the artwork. So I try to stay pretty positive so I enjoy the process. Any other questions?
Can you talk about what?
There's a guy behind you. I didn't ask one yet.
Oh, besides the websites I've already mentioned, coming out from the other angle, say if you're an artist and you want to get even just like a breakdown, like just a publication, right, not commission. Is there any website where like maybe lesser known or independent game designers might tend to conglomerate and just put out there, hey, there's nothing where
Not that I'm aware of. Most independent game designers I've met through conventions. I find at this point most indie game guys, and it's weird because they actually have money now too. Because a lot of them will do a Kickstarter and realize like, whoa, we actually have an art budget. You know, like I've actually gotten paid better by independent publishers than by major game companies at this point because of Kickstarter kind of changes that. But still, most of them will cruise through the art show at Gen Con or I'm hoping here at Origin. This is my first Origin, so I don't know. And so yeah, I get a lot of work that way, even from the independent guys. Which I mean, this nowadays being independent doesn't really mean what it used to mean.
That's true.
So, but yeah, so no, I don't have like a magic bullet for you for the internet there. I will say if there's games that you're into, contact the people that make them and show them your art, and you might get work that way as well. When I first got started, I went to Paizo's website and I looked up every game company that sold art through Paizo and contacted every single one of them with my portfolio, and I got back, I think I got about 10 emails back from the over 100 emails I sent, and I got 0 jobs whatsoever. But my art also wasn't that great back then when I was first getting started, so who's to say why they didn't hire me? And then you had a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to hear more. You said you spent about 3 years running or putting your art to conventions. Was that right? Or was it 3 conventions in a row?
Yeah, 3 years.
What was that like? You didn't really. So I know there's a lot of ups and
so
downs.
for me it was really different. So this would have been 2009 when I got started. 2010 was I did about 30 conventions that year, so I was doing a lot of shows. And I feel like I sort of stepped sideways into the industry because I started doing zombie portraits at conventions. So I'd take people's photo and draw them as a zombie. And I set up a sign saying I would do this at my first Gen Con, and I was charging $20 a person. I did 82 over 4 days, so I actually kind of freaked out. I was like, oh my god, I made actual money doing art. Just like, so I did a bunch of horror conventions and did tons of shows doing zombie portraits, and that's how I made my money and could afford to be at these shows, because I wasn't really selling very many prints of my fantasy art, but I was cranking out zombie portraits. But I was still there at the convention, meeting the other artists, meeting the art directors, getting critiques on the work I actually wanted to be doing. So that's
Wow.
how I got through.
I know a lot of times when I walk through like the artist alley and stuff, and some people I feel like it's neat because you had like a gimmick, you had something to make sure that you
And
made your
I
money.
got really lucky as well because 2010 is also the first season of Walking Dead happened.
Oh, yeah.
And so like I just was sort of in the right place at the right time with the right product. And so like it pretty drastically went from doing a few zombie portraits to like doing zombie portraits for people's pets and their grandmothers. And, like it just became so much mainstream. Now on the other side of that, it did eventually peter out to where I don't do any zombie portraits really anymore. And last couple horror conventions I try to do, the zombie thing is, you know, it's kind of played out. Like there's only so much saturation. Things seem to have about a 4 or 5 year lifespan in pop culture. So but that's the other thing though, I wouldn't say sit around and think of what's popular and try and do that because you'll always be one step behind. But yeah, it was, you know, like I guess lightning. I don't know, yeah. So over you were saying you walk through artist alleys and
Yeah, well, I didn't want to really say, but you know, sometimes like I'll meet some great artists, but they're sitting there and I feel like I almost feel bad sometimes because you feel like, I know you're probably struggling and you're sitting here and you have a couple things and it looks pretty good, but you know, like nobody's buying. So I kind of wanted to hear like what your side of the story was because I imagine everyone goes through that because when you're unknown.
yeah, it's that. It's also because it's one of the factors where I used to regret my time working in marketing, but I since realized that I learned a lot of skills that I now use for my own business, and setting up at conventions is not the same as breaking in. You really have to think through why you're there. If you're there to be seen by art directors, then it's okay to not sell. You know, like you've spent the money to be in front of the right people. If you're there to sell, that's a whole different thing. And it's like, it doesn't matter if you're selling women's shoes or, you know, games or art. There's certain sales techniques that work and you can work on those and polish those, and that's part of it as well. You know, another thing I heard from John Shindeheady, he used to say, you should work on your 30-second pitch as well. Like, if you happen to find yourself in an elevator with the art director for Dungeons & Dragons, what would you say to him in the time you went from floor 10 to floor 1? And so that's another thing to think about, too, is get to practice talking about your art. Oh, one other thing, too, when talking about your art, do not say bad stuff about your art when you're showing it. Trust me, art directors know. They see a piece where like, the head's all messed up. They know the head's messed up. But if you start apologizing, and artists can be so down on their work, it's much easier to see all the flaws. But when you're in that position, you got to think of it like going to a job interview. And so if you were at the job interview, like you're trying to get a job working in a store, and you're like, yeah, I'm not really clean, and sometimes I'm late to work, and I don't really like shoes, and you know, like people be like, I'm not gonna hire that guy. And so it's the same in art. You know, if you're showing your book and you're like, yeah, like that piece kind of sucks, and you know, it's like, oh well, obviously you're no good. You just told me you're no good. And so let the art director find out you're no good on their own. That's yeah.
So what would you say?
How would I talk about it?
Yeah.
So it depends on whether I'm speaking to an art director or whether I'm talking to a customer. They're not the same person, and these days I'm a lot more interested in customers than I am art directors, but I've started moving more into direct sales of my own personal pieces. But when talking to an art director, I would say, hello, my name is Sam Flegal. Here's my book. If you're curious, I can tell you some of the companies these pieces are for, but otherwise, enjoy looking at it, and I'd love to hear any feedback that you have. And then I would keep my damn mouth shut, as hard as that is. That's something you have to learn, and whatever they say, oh, I see what you're saying, thank you very much. Sometimes I'd even take notes as I was getting a portfolio review, so I'd remember what they said and how to improve those things. And like, oh, they said I need to work on perspective. Like, well, you go get a book. What's the best book out on perspective? And that's the cool thing about Google now is you can actually type in best book on perspective and get 3 or 4 books to choose from, and like all that kind of stuff. So yeah, so that's how I have it. Now, if I'm talking to a customer, it's a very different experience because then it's usually I start with something like, you know, why did you come to the table? Which piece caught your eye? Like, oh, I like that one with the girl standing on the dragon's neck. I'm like, oh well, I'm glad you liked that. That was a book cover that I did for Hero Games, for Fantasy Hero Complete. They're kind of an interesting company to work for because they have a mandate that all characters have to be smiling on their covers, even the villains. So like, she's just defeated this dragon, but the dragon's smiling, and like he's like, I guess, happy about it. So this particular piece, I call it "Let's Make a Deal." And so I imagine the dragon's like, actually, I got this brother, right? He's a blue dragon, and his hord's much better than mine. Why don't you just take what you guys want, and then I'll give you his address, and just let me live. And she's like, I don't know, like, we kicked your butt. And then like the dwarfs in the background really excited about his gem, and the wizards laughing about whatever's on his scroll, and so just getting into all that stuff. Also, I did some fun stuff like Magneto's helmet's actually in the treasure hoard. It was easier to see in the original. It's harder to see in the print because it's so small. But so I do stuff like that, where there's also a couple of Celtic artifacts that are actually real world artifacts that I included from some books that I've read. Just stuff like that. I try to think of like what would be cool to have in a treasure hoard. There's lots of skulls too, because I like skulls, and so yeah. So that's kind of what I was into, why I painted it. What you see a lot of artists do is someone says, "Ooh, I like that piece with the girl standing on the dragon." I'm like, yeah, it's okay, but I painted it last year, and like I've done much better work. You should see what's in my studio now, and that's a whole different conversation that doesn't really go anywhere. Whereas hopefully, once I've told them the story about why I painted it, then they start thinking about, that would look cool on my wall. And by the way, if you buy 2 prints, you get a discount. So you should look through and see if there's a second one you like. And anyway, so sales is not, it's something that I enjoy and I did have a natural affinity for, but it's definitely a skill. The first time I set up at a convention, I was very nervous. I was not good at working through that whole process, and there's a lot of stuff. If you're interested in sales, there's a lot of stuff you can look at and go through. So yeah, we got about 5 minutes left. So anybody have a burning question they've been holding back? So many folks in the back who haven't asked anything. Yeah, you and the flannel.
You just kind of hinted at improving on your artwork, like getting a book on learning how to do one certain thing. Would you recommend that for all cases? And do you think like receiving a higher degree is as valuable in this line of work as it is in like being a doctor or anything like that?
Yeah, I can address all that stuff. Degrees are not completely worthless, but largely so. No one will ever look at your degree in this field. That's true if you're a graphic designer or, but you're going to show your portfolio. People are going to look at your portfolio and see if you have the chops. Going and getting another expensive degree, unless that gives you your chops, doesn't matter. Improving, finding good teachers is really important. Like you do much better going to the illustration master class and studying under the people there than going to a semester. I mean, there's a lot of, and that's just one example. If you look online, there's a lot of mentorship and alternative school choices that you can take. But I learned more about oil painting in 7 days of the illustration master class than in an entire year in art school. And I have a bachelor's in fine arts with emphasis in graphic design, so I went that route, and I had a whole career based on that. But aside from a few things, I don't use very much of that stuff. The one advantage that school has is it's really good at helping you grow up. And I find that like 18 and 19-year-olds often aren't done growing up in our society. So that helps transition into real adulthood. But, at a certain point, it doesn't really matter. There's something they said for getting a master's degree if you want to teach. But I just find that to actually be a weird thing about academia. Like, Frank Frazetta couldn't teach at a college because he didn't have a master's degree. And to me, that's really, really dumb. So, did that answer all of that?
Yeah.
And I mean, books, there's a lot of great books out there, but for me, that one-on-one interaction, like at the illustration master class, I sat down, I thought I knew how to paint, I didn't. Dan DeSantis was like, no, you do this, you put it there, go. And I followed his steps very slowly, and suddenly it was just like, oh my gosh, and then that being in that environment helps. So the other thing is the college environment can be really great in terms of, you know, it's you're around other people making art, and that can be really motivating. So there are things that you get in college, but I certainly don't think that if you already have a degree, going back and getting a degree in art will put you any further ahead. All right, I think that brings us to a close. Thank you guys so much for coming out. Thanks for the great questions. Thank you for